Hello and welcome to this devlog. I have been working on a new hobby project recently, a Codelabs, my own personal version, and I figured I would share something about it. Maybe it's interesting to someone, or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe someone is curious. So first, what is it about? I have my front page here, my index, I guess. And the point is that the Codelabs, if you're familiar with the concept, then it's a way to write documentation or various materials, articles, walkthrough guides, tutorials, or other words for the same thing, or exercises. So I have my material, my teaching material, organized in different categories based on the courses. So for example, we can go and check out the DML documentation here. Click on that and that will take us to this sort of basic Codelab setup. So it consists of a bunch of steps, and each step will contain some information or some exercise that you need to do or whatever, and you go through it step by step. So each step contains the kind of slide. So I guess it's sort of like a PowerPoint perhaps. And you can go through it and you can read about how to insert data, and once you have read about that, there's some more data you can insert and update some data, and you can see various code examples, and here's some links to some documentation and other good stuff, right? So this is a Codelab documentation. So I'm working on expanding this with most of my material. I got tired of putting it on our school's website, It's Learning. Whenever there's a new semester, I have to copy all my stuff to a new course page. So I have a bunch of duplicates of the same things lying around, and it's just tedious to manage. So I figured I could put everything in one place. I will at some point also add my video links here to YouTube. Currently I'm working on a Blazor to-do app tutorial. So whenever you start a new programming language, you will start with printing out hello world, and then it seems like the next step would be to make a to-do tutorial. So this one goes through Blazor server, how to create a to-do tutorial. There's a bit about the project structure and so on, and so various kinds of documentation. This is basic, super basic introduction to sockets in C#. Just 3 slides. Something is not working correctly, that should be updated, but maybe I'll figure that out at some point. So I sort of stole this idea from my colleague. He also has a Codelabs thing. He uses something from Google, I believe, or maybe it's a sort of copy of Google. So apparently Google has a Codelab. And it's sort of similar. And they have a bunch of other tutorials similar. I can see some introduction to debugging, and the structure will be pretty similar. Also with some contents out here, they have a fancy animation for when they change slides here. Maybe I will get that at some point. But otherwise it sort of looks pretty similar, which is no surprise because I pretty much stole a bunch of stuff. So my colleague here, he uses an approach where he can write the documentation in a Google Doc, and then there's some tool he can use to generate an HTML page, and then he uploads that to GitHub. GitHub has this GitHub pages where you can host your static website. So whatever you learned in the course RWD can be put on here. So I tried using his approach with the Google Docs, but I had to download a tool and install some runtime for I think for a program that a programming language that I didn't know, and I don't know, it got tedious, and I was a bit annoyed with the workflow. I didn't want it as a Google Doc. I would prefer to use Markdown, and that was available, but everything would have to be put into a single Markdown file, and I wanted to split it out in multiple files, so each step here is in a single file, so it's easier to sort of manage and maintain. So I got to the conclusion that maybe I should try and do my own sort of. I was curious and see if it could be done, so here we are. So Markdown, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I initially wasn't, and I learned it was actually pretty cool. You can go do a bunch of stuff with it, and as a program, I like the approach. It's sort of like a very lightweight LaTeX, if you're familiar with that. So each of my steps, this was the SQL thing, each of my steps is contained in this kind of file, and it's sort of like you half program the styling. You can see I have a header, and that's done by just using a hash. A subsection here is done by 3 hashes, or just 2. There would be a larger one. So you can do a bunch of stuff with Markdown, and that's pretty cool, and you sort of, you inline your style. So instead of using an editor where you have to go and mark something, and then you have to, I can actually bold it here, or you have to sort of click around to set up things, then you can do most of it sort of programmatically. So if I wanted a header, you can see that I'm using Writer here. I assume other JetBrains products has a similar Markdown editor. So I have my source and then the output over here. So I can create a header, I can create a subsection with another subsection. That's 4. No GitHub for this one. I think you can go to subsection 6 or something like that. If I wanted to put something bold, I'll surround it with 2 stars. If I want to put something in italic, we do the underscores. You can subscript, I think it's called. Is it like this perhaps? No, I don't remember. Superscript perhaps, I think is that's not rendered. So not everything is rendered correctly in this here. I think there's a bunch of add-ons. So maybe you want a list or a numbered list. Or if you were to look up Microsoft documentation, like I have here, you can see much of these programming terms, keywords, are highlighted sort of in a different way. You have the monotype, I believe, and it's grayed out. So that's also something that's neat to have in your I have it like this just to indicate this is something specific. It's sort of like a keyword, something you need to look for. Right, so you can do that by surrounding it with these quotes, and you can see the output will become some inline code, or you can actually have a code block like this. Right, if I take some random piece of code here and copy in like that, it will be in a kind of code block like this over here. You can define tables with these pipes and dashes. I don't remember the exact syntax, and usually you have to find an online editor because that's easier. So a lot of this stuff can be sort of programmed into the file. So Markdown is pretty cool. Obviously I could have used HTML. You can sort of express more things with HTML, but it's also more bloaty. I would have to surround everything with these tags, and if you want to format something, maybe I want a hard line break here. Okay. Maybe I want a new paragraph, so I do this in HTML. I believe, without being any expert, you have to surround with p tags and make a b tag. I think maybe that's also interpreted by Markdown. So it's just nice and easy to edit with, and you can do a bunch of stuff with a few tools, and it sort of lines up nicely. You can obviously include links to wherever, and then that can be clicked, and I don't know, it's probably open Google somewhere, or you can link to images by putting an exclamation mark in front instead. So you can see my, well, here's a table actually, so that's the structure of a table. So where do we start? I started out by doing a side rip of my colleague's Codelab, and figured out that was a lot of code. I think I got 2,000 lines of JavaScript and equally much CSS, and as I wanted to do this myself, more or less, there was no way I could just plug and play with the JavaScript, and I really didn't understand enough to sort of strip out the things that I needed. So, well, I wanted that step-by-step thing, so I went ahead and Googled, step-by-step form HTML, and that came up with this kind of thing. So, you can go to the next thing and next, and there's this tracker, how far are you, with no real validation, but it's had these step things that I wanted. Okay, so that I could totally steal that, and there was some styling that was sort of manageable. The HTML was pretty simple, and then the JavaScript, I could understand what was going on. There's like a next previous button, so whenever you click that it will figure out which of these tabs or slides are we currently on. So all of the slides here are actually here initially in the HTML. This is first and last name, so that's the first one. And then the JavaScript just shows step 1, 2, 3, 4, one at a time, right? So whenever you click next, you just show the next one. When you click previous, you show the previous one. So that's my starting point. So next up, I wanted to be able to take this HTML, and then, for each of my Markdown files, I would insert the content as HTML into a slide or a tab. It's called tab here. So I made a base page. This is the basics of my page. This is my entire Codelab page, basically. So here comes in the steps overview, and that's this over here that's generated, and down here we put in all the slides, all the tabs. These are the buttons for next and previous, and buttons again, because I have them at the top and also at the bottom here. And there's a plugins, I don't need that. Just to show the first tab. So that's sort of the basics, and then I made a program to take as input a folder, and it will read through each of these Markdown files. I have a third-party library to convert that into a HTML, and then that's injected here, and based on these steps here, one welcome to insert data and so on, I will create the steps overview. So I had to introduce the leading zeros because Writer organizes things alphabetically. So if I started with 1 welcome, the next one would be 10, whatever step, 11, and then up to 19, and then 2, and then 20 and 21 and so on. So with the leading zeros, everything is organized in the correct row, and I just include it in my generator to strip any leading zeros here. So whenever I need to generate a new page, a new Codelab tutorial, the outcome is a page like this, a bit of a mess because no one needs to read this. this is auto-generated, all of it, based on the contents of these Markdown files here. So my generator class will basically, well, we start here. I have a path to my base page, and then a path to the folder that contains the tutorial that I want to generate an HTML page for. So currently Blazor to do tutorial part 1 here. There's a bunch of stuff in here, and whenever we click generate, it will go through these and generate the page. So first thing is to, well, I have my main builder. First we read the base page, right? It's pretty straightforward. Then we insert all the steps overview, so that's these guys. I generate the HTML for that, and that's done by I need to fix something at some point. Well, I get all the Markdown files, I sort them based on alphabetical order. I strip out the actual name for each of them. I remove the leading zeros, and then I create this little bit of HTML with the file name. So in a resulting page up here at the beginning, I have my steps overview. Maybe if we just organize things a bit here, steps for welcome, insert data, and delete rows, and so on, which was that one. Right, so that's generated, pretty simple HTML, and then the rest is just styling. And then down here we have each of the tabs. So one tab, that's the first slide. Another tab that ends down here, that's the next slide. And again, my JavaScript just keeps track of which one to display and which ones to hide. So once the steps have been inserted, we insert all the tabs from empty Markdown files. So this is basically reading all the files and generating this tab HTML. So again, we sort all the files so I get them in the correct order. I construct a single tab. So for each of these files, I create the HTML for a single tab, and we do that by this third-party library called Markdown. See, there we go. Markdown, that can basically take as input a string of Markdown and output the equivalent in HTML. I use some advanced extensions so that I can create the tables. It probably does other things, I don't know. And then, you know, I just take that generated HTML and surround it with a div of class tab, like that. And that's one slide, one tab. We'll do that a couple of times for however many tabs there are. And that's then in the end, it is inserted here as the step pages. So in my base page, right here, I just replace this with the generated HTML based on my Markdown files. So then I have some extra stuff because I want to have lines on my code. Right, you can see I have line 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and that requires me to add some extra class or attribute to my HTML. Line numbers. So whenever I have a code tag, I want the class to be line numbers here, so I just add that. Then there's some stuff because I wanted to have the ability to highlight certain parts of the code. Right, like down here, you can see these lines, these are the important ones, they are highlighted in yellow, and I wanted to do that, and that's also something to do with the styling. So I needed to Yeah. Well, I need to add some attributes to some of the page here. Data line. Right. So this one here that says my pre-tag. There's always a code tag inside of that, and the lines number 10 and 21 to 27 and 33 to 36. Those should be highlighted. So 10. Well, here 31, 36, 33, 36, 21, 27. That's highlighted. From my Markdown, I include that in my Markdown to say, so let's put an extra tag on my code block to say which lines of code should be highlighted. And that goes actually over here. That information, 10, 21. And so I had to modify, write a method that modified it, basically took that information and put it over here. So that's what this line does. And then in the end we take the entire content and write out to a file called page. So all my tutorials or whatever they contains this page, which is the content. And well, Writer has a pretty cool, neat feature. This doesn't update either. I'll have to check that out at some point. So that was a quick overview of the code. It just step by step goes through. Whenever I need a new feature, I will add a new method. It's pretty crude way of reworking the HTML. This one with the line highlighting, you see that down here there's some regular expression going on, and I'm trying to match things, and I do sort of fear that in the future maybe I'll be matching things that I don't need to match, and yeah, that's maybe going to be a problem at some point, but I don't know. So it's working pretty well so far. I can write my Markdown files and output this page and upload to GitHub Pages, and then other people can access it. The tutorials are available. This I have my code base on my GitHub as a project here. It's public, so you can clone that if you want to take a look at stuff. At some point I hope to make a version 2. We're using Blazor WebAssembly. That can also be hosted on GitHub Pages. I did a test once and sort of managed to figure out it was a bit cumbersome, and I lost interest, but it was still, it's an interesting idea. Maybe version 3 will be an actual online editor, so other people can actually use it. We'll see if I get to that point at sometime in the future. I also wanted to give credits to this thing called Prism. Prism is the thing that you see whenever my code is displayed somewhere. Here's code, right? So Prism is responsible for basically taking, this was step 14. So you can see the Markdown, it just generates a pretty boring gray blob, right? And I wanted, highlighting, and I wanted the line numbers and sort of styling, that kind of thing. And Prism is just a JavaScript file that you can download, and it's super awesome for displaying code. And it has a bunch of built-in styles. I know there are others. So there are some examples and other ways of styling that, and I know there are other people have made other stylings, and it has support for so many things. So you can just basically click off, okay, I want Java, so we find Java. I want to be able to display Java somewhere, Java alphabetically. I should be able to find it. Here we go, okay, Java. There's some C#, okay. And then you just download the JavaScript and this styling sheet and put that in here, Prism. You get well, many lines of code. Fair number of stylings, to style all kinds of programming languages. So in my Markdown files, I can just now you see, okay, I want to highlight this with razor syntax, or I could do with SQL. And so it will highlight using SQL. Okay, writer's editor can actually do SQL here, so that's neat. So Prism is pretty powerful. I did some styling of my own to set things up. Most of it was, you know, since it looks a lot like Google's own Codelab, I sort of was heavily inspired by that. And I have my JavaScript for navigating the tabs, not too much to worry about. Again, I sort of stripped out what I needed from that step-by-step form, so show a specific tab by index, or I guess that's sort of the same thing. I don't really remember, I didn't spend too much time on this. And change to the next of the previous one. Then there's some stuff that I had to strip out of Prism because the code highlighting was messing up because of this JavaScript, so I had to sort of update things. So yeah, but you know, the code behind things are somewhat simple. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say about my my project. So thank you for watching.